December 20th, 1944. Wehrmacht, Belgium. Unteroffizier Klaus Hartmann pressed his eye against the ZF-20E telescopic sight of his 88mm flak gun, scanning the fog-shrouded ridgeline 2,000 yards to the west. His breath formed white clouds in the bitter cold as he adjusted the elevation wheel with numb fingers. Behind him, his 9-man crew huddled around the weapon, stamping their feet against the frozen ground, waiting. The gun sat in its deployed position, its cruciform outriggers staked into the earth, wheels removed and stored nearby. They had been in this position for 3 hours, covering the main road into Wehrmacht. The massive barrel pointed toward the American lines, capable of sending a 10-kilogram armor-piercing shell through any Allied tank at this range. This was the weapon that had terrorized British armor in North Africa, that had shredded American formations in Sicily and Italy. The legendary 88. Through the scope, Hartmann caught movement, a darker shape against the grey fog, then another. American armor, moving into position on the ridgeline. His hand reached for the radio handset to report, but something made him pause. These weren't the low-slung Shermans he had grown accustomed to engaging. These vehicles had a different profile, taller turrets, longer barrels. He counted 3. No, 4 of them, spreading out along the ridge in a tactical formation that suggested they knew exactly where his gun was positioned. One of the American vehicles stopped, its turret traversing with what seemed like deliberate slowness. Hartmann watched through his sight as the barrel elevated slightly, pointing not at the roadway his gun was covering, but directly at his position. The range was extreme, perhaps 4,200 yards, well beyond what any Sherman could effectively engage. But that barrel looked different, heavier, more powerful. The flash came before the sound, a single bright muzzle blast from the American vehicle on the ridge. Hartmann ducked instinctively as a 90mm shell screamed overhead, impacting in the tree line 30 meters behind his position. The explosion showered his crew with frozen dirt and wood splinters. When he looked back through his sight, all 4 American vehicles had their guns trained on his location. The tactical situation had just inverted in a way that German doctrine had never prepared him for. The 88mm flak gun represented nearly 20 years of German military engineering excellence. Designed in the 1920s by Krupp, in partnership with Swedish manufacturer Bofors to circumvent Treaty of Versailles restrictions, the weapon had evolved through multiple iterations. The Flak 18, introduced in 1933, had proved its worth in the Spanish Civil War. By the time Germany invaded Poland in 1939, over 2,500 flak guns were in service, primarily in their intended role as anti-aircraft weapons. But it was in North Africa that the 88 gained its fearsome reputation as a tank killer. In June 1941, at Halfaya Pass on the Libya-Egypt border, 13 dug-in 88s from Rommel's 15th Panzer Division decimated repeated British tank charges. Of 190 British tanks engaged, including the heavily armoured Matilda II, approximately 100 were knocked out. German gunners claimed 1 kill for every 20 rounds fired. The mathematics were devastating. The weapon's specifications explained its lethality. The standard armor-piercing round, the Panzergranate 39, could penetrate 105 millimeters of armor sloped at 30 degrees at 1,000 meters. With a muzzle velocity of 820 meters per second, the shells arrived with tremendous kinetic energy. The gun could fire 15 rounds per minute with a trained crew. Its maximum ground engagement range exceeded 14,000 meters. Though effective anti-tank range was typically limited to around 2,000 meters by the limitations of its telescopic sight and the decreasing accuracy at extreme distance. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The crew requirements revealed both the weapon's capability and its fundamental vulnerability. A standard flak battery consisted of 11 men, a gun commander, a layer who aimed the weapon, a fuse setter, a loader, 4 ammunition handlers, 2 mechanics, and a radio operator. When deployed for anti-aircraft work, the gun connected via cables to a central fire control unit, the Commando Gerrit 40, which used optical rangefinders and mechanical computers to calculate firing solutions. For direct fire against ground targets, the crew relied on the simpler ZF-20E telescopic sight. Deployment was the critical factor. A trained crew could bring the weapon into action in approximately 2 minutes from travel configuration. This required detaching the wheels, lowering and staking the forearms of the X-shaped gun mount, and deploying the gun shield that provided minimal protection for the crew. 2 minutes represented optimal conditions: trained crew, level ground, no enemy fire. Under combat stress, deployment times extended significantly. The weapon's profile presented another challenge. In its deployed configuration, the 88 stood nearly 2.5 meters tall. The tall armored shield, added after experience in Spain, showed crew vulnerability to small arms fire, made the gun visible at considerable distances. In the open terrain of North Africa, heat, haze, and desert distances had provided some concealment. In the forests of Belgium in December 1944, the weapon's height made it impossible to hide effectively. Hauptmann Friedrich Wolf, commanding the Mixed Flak Battalion attached to the 5th Panzer Army during the Ardennes offensive, understood these limitations intimately. His after-action report, discovered in Wehrmacht archives in 1989, described the changing tactical environment his crews faced. In North Africa and Russia, our 88s achieved supremacy through superior range and hitting power. British and Soviet tanks had to close to within 500 meters to engage us effectively. We could destroy them at 1,500 meters or more. The tactical advantage was decisive. We chose our positions, prepared our fields of fire, and destroyed approaching armor before it could threaten us. But December 1944 was not North Africa. Wolf continued his assessment with brutal honesty. Reports from forward batteries indicate American tank destroyers with guns matching or exceeding our 88's range and penetration. These vehicles are mobile, can take position quickly, and engage at distances we considered safe. Our batteries are being engaged and destroyed before completing deployment or before identifying the threat's location. The weapon system Wolf's crews were encountering was the 90mm gun motor, carriage M36, known by the nickname Jackson, though that designation was primarily an Ordnance Department publicity name not widely used by frontline troops. The M36 represented American industry's answer to German heavy armor and the belated recognition that the earlier M10 tank destroyer, with its 3-inch gun, was inadequate against Panthers and Tigers. Development had begun in September 1942, when American planners recognized the 3-inch gun would be outclassed by anticipated German developments. The 90mm M3 gun, adapted from anti-aircraft use, provided the firepower needed. Mounted in a new turret on the reliable M10 chassis, itself based on the Sherman tank's drivetrain, the M36 combined mobility, protection, and long-range hitting power. The numbers told the story of American industrial capacity. The M36's 90mm M3 gun could penetrate 129mm of armor at 30-degree angle at 500 yards, 122mm at 1,000 yards. With high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition, though such rounds remained scarce throughout the war, penetration exceeded these figures significantly. More importantly, the gun was mounted in a powered turret that could traverse 360 degrees, providing tactical flexibility the towed German 88 could never match. The M36 carried 47 rounds of 90mm ammunition. Its Ford GAA Vate engine provided 450 horsepower, giving the vehicle a top speed of 45 miles per hour on roads. Combat radius was 150 miles. The crew of 5, commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver, operated within an open-topped turret that traded overhead protection for reduced weight and better observation. The vehicle weighed approximately 28 tons, light enough for tactical mobility, but heavy enough to provide a stable firing platform. First deliveries reached Europe in September 1944. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion began re-equipping on September 30th. By the time the Germans launched their Ardennes offensive on December 16th, 7 tank destroyer battalions had converted to the M36, with more conversions ongoing. Production had ramped up dramatically, with over 1,300 M36s delivered by year's end. The tactical doctrine governing M36 employment emphasized mobility and concentrated firepower. Tank destroyer battalions operated independently, held in reserve and committed to threatened sectors. The doctrine stressed the M36's ability to engage enemy armor at range, using superior gun performance to destroy German tanks before they could close to effective distance. Speed allowed tank destroyers to reposition rapidly, denying German forces the opportunity to mass overwhelming firepower against any single position. Lieutenant Alfred Rose of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion demonstrated the M36's capabilities on December 1, 1944, near the Ruhr River. Rose, positioned hull down on a ridgeline with good visibility across open terrain, spotted a German Panther tank at extreme distance. Using his telescopic sight's ranging grid, he fired 2 ranging shots to determine distance. The third shot, at a calculated range of 4,600 yards, 2.6 miles, struck the Panther, and subsequent rounds set it afire. The engagement took place at a distance exceeding the maximum range of the Panther's gun by over 1,000 yards. This single engagement, documented in multiple after-action reports and witnessed by several observers, represented a fundamental shift in armored warfare. For the first time, American forces possessed a mobile armored vehicle capable of outranging German tank guns while remaining immune to return fire. The psychological impact on German crews would prove as significant as the tactical implications. Unteroffizier Klaus Hartmann, pinned behind his 88 near Wehrmacht, experienced this psychological shift directly. After the first ranging shot passed overhead, he made the only decision available. "Deckung!" he shouted. "Take cover!" His crew scrambled away from the exposed gun position as 3 more 90mm shells impacted around the weapon. One struck the gun shield directly, penetrating the armor and destroying the elevation mechanism. Another hit the outrigger, buckling the cruciform mount. The 88, legendary destroyer of Allied armor, sat disabled, without firing a single shot in response. From a covered position 50 meters away, Hartmann watched the American tank destroyers on the ridge. They made no move to advance. They didn't need to. From their position, they dominated the battlefield for thousands of yards in every direction. Any German armor attempting to use the road Hartmann's battery was meant to protect would be engaged long before reaching effective range. The tactical equation had been rewritten by American industrial capacity, and German crews were learning the new mathematics one engagement at a time. The experience repeated itself across the Ardennes battlefield during those desperate December days. Oberfeldwebel Hans Krüger commanded an 88 battery positioned to cover a critical road junction near Street, Vith. His battery of 4 guns had been hastily dug in, the crews working through the night to create fighting positions with overhead cover and camouflage. The position followed proper doctrine, fields of fire cleared, ammunition stockpiled, communications established with forward observers. On December 20th, American forces counterattacked toward Street, Vith. Krüger's forward observer reported American armor moving up, estimated at company strength, 10 to 15 vehicles. Krüger ordered his guns to hold fire until the Americans closed to within 1,000 meters, the distance where his 88s enjoyed maximum advantage. Standard ambush doctrine, proven effective from North Africa through Russia. The American vehicles never closed to 1,000 meters. At approximately 1,800 meters, they halted on a ridgeline. Through his binoculars, Krüger watched their turrets traverse, searching for targets. The vehicles were M36 tank destroyers. He recognized them from intelligence briefings. Then the first American gun fired. The shell impacted 30 meters from Krüger's No. 3 gun, showering the crew with frozen earth. A ranging shot. Krüger's battery immediately engaged, all 4 88s firing almost simultaneously. The shells, aimed with precision at the visible American vehicles, all fell short. At 1,800 meters, targeting a hull-down enemy on higher ground, The 88's flat trajectory became a liability. The American tank destroyers adjusted fire, and within 2 minutes, one of Kruger's guns was disabled by a direct hit. Another was forced to cease firing when a near miss damaged its traverse mechanism. The American vehicles repositioned, moving along the ridgeline to new firing positions, never exposing themselves fully, never closing the distance. Kruger's remaining guns tried to engage, but the Americans held every advantage: higher ground, longer effective range, and most critically, mobility. When Kruger attempted to reposition one of his guns to gain a better angle, the M36s engaged immediately, forcing his crew to abandon the weapon mid-deployment. By nightfall, Kruger's battery had expended over 300 rounds of ammunition and achieved, by his own estimate, perhaps 2 hits on American vehicles, neither confirmed as kills. He had lost 2 guns destroyed, 1 damaged beyond field repair, and 7 men killed or wounded. The Americans held the ridgeline, and the road junction remained under their observation. Kruger's report to division headquarters was succinct. Enemy tank destroyers engage from beyond our effective range. Request immediate withdrawal to alternate positions. The pattern emerged across every sector where M36s deployed. The 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, operating near Freihaldenhoven in early December, knocked out a King Tiger at 1,000 yards with a side shot to the turret. The 776th Battalion engaged Panthers routinely at 1,500 yards, targeting the turret where armor was thinner than the glacis plate. The American doctrine of engaging at maximum range, using superior optics and ranging techniques, negated many of the German tanks' armor advantages. But it was against German towed anti-tank guns, especially the 88s, that the M36's mobility proved most decisive. A towed gun, once deployed, became essentially fixed. Moving it under fire was nearly impossible. The crew needed to disconnect from cover, attach the wheels, hook up the towing vehicle, and move, all while exposed to enemy observation and fire. The 2-minute deployment time that made the 88 tactically flexible in offensive operations became a fatal vulnerability in defensive combat against an enemy who could engage from beyond the gun's effective range. Major Wilhelm Schröder, a Luftwaffe Flak battalion commander, whose guns were pressed into ground combat during the Ardennes fighting, documented this reality in his combat diary. December 23rd entry: lost 3 more 88s today to American tank destroyer fire. In each case, the pattern was identical. American vehicles take position at long range, often on elevated ground. They engage our batteries with ranging shots, then concentrated fire. Our crews cannot effectively return fire at such distances. Attempts to relocate draw immediate suppression fire. We are losing guns and crews without inflicting corresponding damage on the enemy. Schröder's December 28th entry revealed the psychological toll. Crews are becoming reluctant to deploy guns in open positions, knowing they will be targeted immediately by American heavy weapons. Morale is suffering. The men ask why we must face weapons that outrange our own. There are no good answers. We do what we can with what we have, but the tactical situation favors the enemy decisively. The experience of Feldwebel Ernst Becker illustrated the human cost of this tactical imbalance. Becker's gun crew had fought through France, survived the Falaise pocket, and been reconstituted for the Ardennes offensive. On December 22nd, his battery deployed to cover an approach to Bastogne. The position was well chosen: good fields, of fire, some natural cover, communication with forward observers. American tank destroyers appeared on a distant ridgeline shortly after dawn. Becker's gun commander ordered the crew to take up firing positions. Before they could load the first round, 2 90mm shells impacted within meters of their gun. The blast killed the loader instantly and wounded 2 others. Becker, acting as gun layer, was thrown against the gun shield by the concussion. When he regained his senses, the position was under continuous fire, shells landing every 30 seconds in a systematic destruction of the battery's firing positions. Becker crawled away from the gun as another shell struck it directly, destroying the weapon completely. Of his 11-man crew, 4 were dead, 5 wounded, only 2 escaped uninjured. The entire engagement lasted perhaps 5 minutes from first shot to Becker's gun being destroyed. His crew never fired a single round in response. In his post-war memoir, Becker reflected on the experience. "We had been trained to believe our 88 was superior to any Allied weapon. In North Africa, in Russia, this had been true. But in Belgium, we learned we were facing something different. The Americans had studied our tactics, understood our weapons' capabilities and limitations, and developed systems to defeat us. Their tank destroyers were not just powerful guns, they were complete weapon systems, mobility, protection, firepower, combined in ways that made our static defense positions untenable." The Battle of the Bulge demonstrated the M36's value conclusively. During the fighting around Street, Vith, Combat Command B of the 7th Armoured Division, employed M36s alongside Shermans and armoured infantry. The tank destroyers provided long-range overwatch, engaging German armour and anti-tank positions from distances that prevented effective response. When German forces attempted to flank American positions, the M36s could reposition rapidly, appearing in new locations and establishing fire superiority before German guns could deploy effectively. The timetable for the German attack called for Street Vith to be captured by 6 p.m. on December 17th. The town did not fall until the night of December 21st. The delay, critical to the failure of the entire offensive, resulted from determined American defense by mechanized forces that included M36-equipped tank destroyer battalions. The mobile defense, enabled by vehicles that could engage, reposition, and engage again faster than German forces could coordinate responses, proved decisive. Statistical analysis from the Ardennes campaign revealed the transformation in anti-tank warfare. American tank destroyer battalions, primarily equipped with M36s by late December, destroyed 306 German tanks during the campaign. German towed anti-tank battalions, many equipped with 88s, suffered the highest loss rates of any German anti-tank forces. The mobility differential had become as important as the firepower differential. The German response to American firepower superiority took multiple forms, none entirely successful. Production of the Pak-43, an improved 88 specifically designed as an anti-tank weapon with better mobility and lower profile, had begun in October 1943. But only approximately 400 were produced throughout the entire war. The weapon remained scarce, issued primarily to elite units rather than general distribution. More significantly, Germany accelerated tank production, attempting to mount the 88 directly on armoured platforms. The Tiger tank, carrying the 88 KBUK-36, provided mobile firepower comparable to the M36. But Tiger production never exceeded 1,350 units total throughout the war. Panthers, armed with the 75mm KWK-42, were produced in larger numbers, approximately 6,000 units, but still insufficient to counter American material advantages. The fundamental problem Germany faced was industrial capacity. The M36 cost approximately $8,500 to produce in 1944. Monthly production peaked at over 200 units. Total wartime production exceeded 2,100 vehicles across all variants. This compared to German production of roughly 400 Pak-43s and 1,350 Tigers through the entire war. America was producing in 6 months what Germany could not match in 4 years. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. But production numbers alone do not explain the tactical shift German crews experienced. The psychological dimension proved equally significant. Gefreiter Paul Zimmermann, gunner on an 88 crew near Houffalize in January 1945, described the transformation. "We had been told our 88 was the finest anti-tank gun in the world. Every engagement in Russia and Italy had proven this. Soviet tanks fell 1,500 meters. British Churchills exploded at similar ranges. We felt invincible behind our gun. Then we faced the Americans with their new tank destroyers. The first time, we prepared our ambush perfectly. dug in positions, clear fields of fire, ammunition ready. The American vehicles appeared at extreme distance, perhaps 2,000 meters. We prepared to fire when they closed to killing range. Instead, they stopped. Their turrets traversed toward us. We thought it was reconnaissance. Then they fired. At 2,000 meters, they fired. And they hit. Zimmerman continued his account with stark honesty. We tried to return fire, but our rounds fell short or went wide. The Americans adjusted and fired again, more accurate. Then concentrated fire from multiple vehicles. We abandoned the gun and took cover. When we looked back, our 88 was burning, hit 3 times. We never touched them. They destroyed us from a distance we thought was safe. After that, every time we deployed the gun, we wondered if American tank destroyers were watching, calculating range, preparing to destroy us before we could fire. The confidence was gone. This psychological shift affected German tactical decision-making throughout the closing months of the war. A captured Wehrmacht training manual from January 1945 stated bluntly, "American tank destroyers are equipped with 90mm guns capable of engaging at ranges exceeding our own anti-tank weapons. Direct engagement from prepared positions will result in detection and destruction before effective response is possible. Emphasis must be placed on concealment, rapid displacement after firing, and coordination with infantry anti-tank teams for close-range engagement." The manual's recommendations revealed the desperate tactical situation. German doctrine was being rewritten to emphasize avoidance rather than engagement, concealment rather than superiority. The 88, once the dominant anti-tank weapon on any battlefield, was being relegated to ambush tactics and hit-and-run operations. The transformation was complete. The human cost of this shift manifested in casualty statistics. German flak battalions pressed into anti-tank service during the Ardennes offensive suffered loss rates exceeding 40%. Of the approximately 1,388mm crews engaged in ground combat operations during December 1944 through January 1945 in the Ardennes sector, Wehrmacht records indicate over 500 were killed, wounded, or captured. Weapon losses exceeded 388s, destroyed or abandoned. American tank destroyer forces, primarily equipped with M36s by this period, suffered significantly lower casualties while achieving higher kill ratios. The 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, which saw heavy action throughout the Ardennes campaign, lost 12 M36s to all causes, while claiming 73 German armoured vehicles, destroyed or disabled. The disparity reflected both tactical superiority and the fundamental advantage of engaging from ranges where German weapons could not effectively respond. Technical Sergeant Robert Morrison, an M36 gunner with the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, described a typical engagement from the American perspective. We'd get reports of German armour or anti-tank guns in a sector. We'd move up, find good position with visibility and fields of fire. Commander would range the target using the scope. Usually 1,500 to 2,000 yards. We'd fire one ranging shot, adjust, then fire for effect. The Germans would try to respond, but their shells would fall short most times. We could see the muzzle flashes, estimate their position, and keep firing. Sometimes they'd try to move their guns, which just made them easier targets. Other times they'd abandon the gun and run. Either way, we controlled the engagement from start to finish. The 90mm gun was accurate, powerful, and we had plenty of ammunition. We could afford to take our time, make sure of the target, and destroy it systematically. Morrison's matter-of-fact description revealed the tactical transformation. American crews were conducting anti-tank operations with the confidence and methodical approach of target practice. German crews were experiencing the terror of being targeted by weapons they could not effectively counter. The psychological positions had inverted completely from the early war period when German 88s had terrorized Allied armor. The final weeks of the war in Europe demonstrated the complete tactical obsolescence of the towed 88 against mobile American firepower. As German forces retreated into Germany proper, Attempts to establish defensive lines based on anti-tank guns proved futile. American tank destroyer battalions, working in coordination with infantry and armor, systematically reduced German positions. The M36's combination of mobility and long-range firepower allowed American forces to engage German strongpoints from multiple directions, overwhelming prepared defenses through maneuver rather than frontal assault. Hauptmann Friedrich Wolff, the Flak Battalion commander whose earlier reports had documented the changing tactical environment, wrote his final assessment in April 1945, shortly before his capture. "We began the war with technological and tactical superiority in anti-tank warfare. Our 88 was the finest weapon of its type, and our crews were trained to exploit its capabilities fully. We defeated Allied armor throughout 1940 through 1943 with acceptable losses. But the enemy learned. The Americans especially proved capable of analyzing our methods, identifying our weapons' limitations, and developing systems specifically designed to defeat us. Their M36 tank destroyer represents not just a powerful gun, but a complete tactical system. It combines the mobility we could never achieve with our towed weapons, the firepower to engage at ranges where we cannot respond effectively, and the industrial capacity to deploy these systems in decisive numbers." Wolff's conclusion was damning. "We lost the anti-tank war not because our weapons failed, but because our entire approach to anti-tank warfare was systematically countered by an enemy with superior industrial resources and the tactical flexibility to exploit them. The 88 remains an excellent weapon, but excellent weapons operated from fixed or semi-fixed positions by depleted crews facing mobile enemies with superior range are merely expensive targets." The post-war analysis by American forces confirmed Wolff's assessment. A study conducted by the Army Ground Forces in 1946 concluded that the M36 had provided American forces with decisive tactical advantage in anti-armor operations during the final 6 months of the European War. The study estimated that M36-equipped battalions had destroyed or disabled over 1,000 German armored vehicles, while suffering less than one-third the casualty rate of earlier tank destroyer units equipped with shorter-range weapons. German post-war analysis was even more stark. A Bundeswehr study in 1956, examining lessons from World War II for the new West German military, concluded that the mobility disadvantage of towed anti-tank guns had proven decisive. The study specifically cited the 88's experience against American tank destroyers as demonstrating that static anti-tank defense, regardless of weapon quality, cannot succeed against mobile enemies with comparable or superior firepower and the tactical initiative to exploit range advantages. The study's recommendations shaped West German armored doctrine for decades. The Bundeswehr, when formed, made mobile anti-tank systems standard from inception. Towed guns were relegated to secondary roles or eliminated entirely. Every major German armored vehicle incorporated lessons learned from the 88's experience against the M36. Mobility became as important as firepower, and systems were designed to engage effectively at maximum range while remaining capable of rapid repositioning. Soviet military thinkers, studying the same conflict, reached similar conclusions. The post-war development of Soviet tank destroyers and self-propelled guns emphasized mobility and firepower, explicitly incorporating lessons from American tank destroyer doctrine. The Su-100, introduced late in the war, reflected this thinking, as did subsequent Soviet armored vehicle development through the Cold War period. The M36 itself enjoyed a remarkably long service life, testament to the soundness of its design and the effectiveness of its tactical concept. During the Korean War, M36s proved capable of destroying any Soviet-supplied armor the North Koreans deployed. The 34-85, which had been nearly invincible against American weapons in 1945, fell routinely to 90mm fire at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. American forces in Korea deployed M36s alongside the newer M26 Pershing tanks, which carried the same 90mm gun. The tank destroyers' mobility and lower profile made them valuable for both anti-armor operations and infantry support. Crews appreciated the weapon's reliability and the devastating effect of high explosive shells against fortified positions. Beyond American service, M36s were supplied to Allied nations through the Military Assistance Program. France deployed them in Indochina during the First Indochina War. Yugoslav forces operated M36s, eventually re-engining them with 500 horsepower Soviet-made diesels from T-55 tanks into the 1990s. During the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s, Serbian and Croatian forces both operated M36s, the vehicles proving effective even 50 years after their original combat debut. The last M36s in military service belonged to the Republic of China Army on Taiwan, which operated them until at least 2001. This represents a service life of nearly 60 years from first combat deployment to final retirement, extraordinary for any armoured vehicle and particularly remarkable for a design that was essentially a wartime expedient, mounting a new turret on an existing chassis. For the German crews who faced M36s in the winter of 1944 and 1945, the experience represented a profound lesson in the realities of industrial warfare. Klaus Hartmann, the Unteroffizier whose 88 was destroyed near Wehrmacht in December 1944, survived the war and emigrated to Canada in 1953. In a 1998 interview conducted by a military historian, he reflected on his wartime experience. "We were trained to believe German weapons were superior. The 88 especially, we were told no Allied tank could stand against it. This was true for years. In Africa, in Russia, in Italy, our gun destroyed everything. We felt like gods of the battlefield. Then came Belgium and the Americans with their new tank destroyers. Everything changed. The first time, when they engaged us from 2,000 meters and destroyed our gun without taking a single hit, I thought it was bad luck. Poor deployment, bad terrain, something we could correct. But it happened again and again. American tank destroyers would appear at long range, engage from positions where we could not effectively respond, and systematically destroy our guns. We were helpless, not because we were poorly trained or cowardly. Our weapons simply could not match theirs at the ranges they chose to fight." Hartmann paused, the memory clearly still painful decades later. "The lesson I learned was about industrial power. Germany built excellent weapons. The 88 was a masterpiece of engineering, but America built thousands of weapons that were good enough, and they built them on mobile platforms that could exploit their advantages. Quality without quantity means nothing. Technology without mobility means nothing. We learned these lessons too late, and the price was paid in blood." Ernst Becker, whose crew was destroyed near Bastona, never spoke publicly about his wartime experiences. But in letters to his family, portions of which were donated to the German Military Archive in 1992, he reflected on the psychological impact. "The worst part was not the fear, though we were always afraid. The worst part was the realization that we were fighting a war we could not win with the weapons we had. Every time we deployed our gun, we knew American tank destroyers might be watching from some distant ridge, calculating range, preparing to destroy us. The confidence that makes soldiers effective was gone. We were just trying to survive until the war ended." The technological and tactical lessons from the 88 versus M36 confrontation influenced armoured warfare development for decades. The concept of the tank destroyer as a mobile, heavily armed platform capable of engaging enemy armour at maximum range became standard doctrine in multiple armies. The American M48 and M60 tanks incorporated lessons from tank destroyer operations, emphasizing gun performance and fire control systems that allowed engagement at extreme ranges. Soviet doctrine, heavily influenced by their study of German defeats, emphasized mobile anti-tank reserves equipped with powerful guns on tracked chassis. The SU series of assault guns and tank destroyers, the ISU-152, ISU-122, and SU-100, all reflected lessons about the necessity of combining firepower with mobility. Later, Soviet vehicles like the T-62 and T-72 incorporated sophisticated fire control systems specifically designed to allow engagement at ranges where older systems would be ineffective. Israeli armored doctrine, developed from 1948 onward with significant American and British influence, placed enormous emphasis on long-range gunnery and the ability to engage targets at distances that prevented effective return fire. The modifications made to Israeli M48s and later to Centurion and M60 tanks all focused on improving first-hit probability at maximum range, the same tactical principle that made the M36 effective against German 88s. Modern tank design continues to reflect these lessons. The American M1 Abrams, with its sophisticated fire control system and 120mm main gun, can engage targets accurately at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters while moving at speed. The German Leopard 2, British Challenger 2, and French Leclerc all incorporate similar capabilities. The fundamental principle established in Belgium in December 1944 remains valid. The side that can engage accurately at longer range, while remaining mobile enough to avoid return fire, holds decisive tactical advantage. The 8-8mm gun itself remained in production and service for decades after World War II. The naval variant, adapted for use on destroyers and patrol boats, served in multiple navies into the 1970s. The anti-aircraft role, for which the gun was originally designed, remained valid until guided missiles made gun-based air defense obsolete. But, as an anti-tank weapon, the towed 88's era ended in the forests and fields of Belgium and Germany in 1944 and 45. Museums across Europe and North America preserve examples of both weapons. The 88mm flak gun sits in collections from the Imperial War Museum in London to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. M36 tank destroyers are displayed at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Fort Benning, and multiple other military installations. Veterans and historians can study the physical artifacts and understand intellectually the tactical relationship between them. But the soldiers who experienced these weapons in combat understood something the museum displays cannot convey. The terror of being engaged by weapons you cannot effectively counter. The helplessness of watching your position destroyed by enemies firing from beyond your reach. The psychological destruction of discovering that everything you were taught about your equipment's superiority was wrong. Oberfeldwebel Hans Kruger, whose battery was systematically reduced by American tank destroyer fire near Street, Vith, was captured in January 1945 and spent 3 years in a prisoner of war camp before repatriation. He never discussed his wartime service with his family, maintaining silence about his experiences until his death in 1978. Among his personal papers, his daughter found a single handwritten note dated April 1945, apparently written shortly before his capture. The note read, "We were told German engineering was superior. We believed it. The 88 proved it for years. Then the Americans came with their tank destroyers and showed us that superior engineering deployed from fixed positions means nothing against adequate engineering deployed with mobility and in overwhelming numbers. They did not need the perfect weapon. They needed enough weapons that were good enough and the industrial capacity to build thousands of them. This is the lesson. This is why we lost." The mathematical reality supported Kruger's bitter assessment. Germany produced approximately 21,000 88mm guns of all variants throughout the war. American industry produced over 2,000 M36s specifically, plus thousands of Sherman tanks with 76mm guns capable of similar long-range performance, plus M26 Pershing tanks with 90mm guns, plus towed anti-tank guns, plus tank destroyers of earlier types. The quantitative advantage was overwhelming, and the qualitative advantage, once American heavy weapons arrived in numbers, shifted decisively. More significantly, American logistical capabilities ensured that frontline units never faced ammunition shortages. M36 crews could fire ranging shots, adjust, and fire for effect without concern for conservation. German crews, by late 1944, often operated under strict ammunition restrictions, with orders to fire only when a kill was certain. This forced German gunners into closer-range engagements where their vulnerability increased dramatically. The fuel situation was even worse. German towing vehicles, the SD, KFZ, 7 half-track prime mover, that typically towed the 88, consumed fuel that Germany could barely provide by late 1944. Batteries often remained stationary not by tactical choice but by necessity, unable to reposition due to fuel shortages. American M36s, powered by Ford GAA engines that were fuel-hungry by absolute standards but adequately supplied by American logistics, retained tactical mobility throughout the campaign. Technical Sergeant Morrison, the M36 gunner quoted earlier, reflected on this disparity in a post-war interview. "We knew the Germans had good weapons. Some of their tanks scared the hell out of us, Tigers and Panthers especially. But we always had ammunition, always had fuel, always had replacement parts if something broke. We could afford to maneuver, take our time, engage at range, and if we needed to displace and engage from a new position, we just moved. The Germans seemed stuck wherever they were, had to defend from fixed positions. Made our job easier." The contrast, Morrison described, represented more than tactical flexibility. It represented the fundamental difference between American industrial capacity and German resource constraints. The M36 was not a revolutionary design. It was an existing chassis, an anti-aircraft gun modified for tank use, a turret adapted from earlier designs. But it worked reliably, could be produced in quantity, and was supported by a logistics system that kept it operational. The 88 was, in pure technical terms, an excellent weapon. Its accuracy, penetration, and reliability when properly maintained were exceptional. But technical excellence meant nothing when the weapon could not be supplied with adequate ammunition, could not be repositioned due to fuel shortages, and faced enemies who could engage from beyond its effective range with impunity. Feldwebel Ernst Becker, in one of his letters home written in March 1945, captured this reality with brutal clarity. "They told us one German soldier was worth 10 Allied soldiers. They told us our weapons were superior. All lies. One American tank destroyer is worth 5 of our 88s because the American weapon can move, can reposition, can choose when and where to fight. Our gun sits where we deploy it and waits to be destroyed. This is not war. This is execution." The final collapse of German resistance in April and May 1945 left hundreds of 88mm guns abandoned across Germany, many never having fired in combat, simply left by crews who recognized the futility of static defense against mobile enemies with overwhelming firepower. American and British forces catalogued these weapons, studied them, and reached conclusions that shaped post-war doctrine. A British Army study from June 1945 concluded, "The German 88mm gun represents excellent engineering and provides formidable capability in its intended anti-aircraft role and in anti-tank use when properly deployed with adequate support. However, the weapon's lack of mobility and high profile make it vulnerable to counter-battery fire from enemy weapons with comparable or superior range. Future anti-tank systems must emphasize mobility as much as firepower to remain viable against opponents with advanced capabilities." The American Army ground forces reached similar conclusions. Their assessment noted that while towed anti-tank guns remained useful for defensive operations where positions could be prepared and camouflaged, the future of anti-tank warfare lay with self-propelled systems, combining armor, mobility, and heavy guns. The M36, while viewed as interim solution due to its open-topped turret and relatively light armor, demonstrated the validity of the concept. These institutional conclusions translated directly into post-war development. The American M103 heavy tank, the M48 Patton, and eventually the M60 all emphasized gun performance and fire control systems, enabling long-range engagement. Tank destroyer battalions were eventually disbanded, their mission absorbed by main battle tanks capable of fulfilling both roles. But the tactical principles established by the M36's success remained central to American armored doctrine. For the men who served in German 88 crews during the war's final months, the experience left scars both physical and psychological. Klaus Hartmann's crew of 11 men suffered 4 killed, 3 seriously wounded, and 4 captured, including Hartmann himself. Hans Kruger's battery of 44 men lost 16 killed, 12 wounded, the remainder captured. Ernst Becker's crew saw 4 killed, 5 wounded from a single engagement. These casualty rates, repeated across hundreds of batteries, represented catastrophic losses. The survivors carried memories of helplessness, of being engaged by enemies they could not effectively fight, of watching friends die in positions that offered no protection against modern firepower. German veterans of the Eastern Front often spoke of the Soviet numerical superiority, the human wave attacks, the desperate close-range combat. But veterans who faced American forces in the West spoke of a different kind of warfare, clinical, systematic, overwhelming in its material superiority. Unteroffizier Hartmann, in his interview decades later, was asked what he would want people to understand about his experience. He thought for a long moment before responding. People should understand that we were not evil men serving an evil cause, though our government certainly was evil. We were young men, mostly, who believed we were defending our country. We trusted our leaders, our training, our equipment. The discovery that we had been fed lies about our equipment's superiority, that we were being sent to fight battles we could not win with weapons that could not compete, that was devastating. When you sit behind an 88 and watch American tank destroyers engage you from 2,000 meters, when you see your shells fall short and their shells land around your position with increasing accuracy, when your friends die and you cannot even effectively shoot back, you realize the entire edifice of lies collapses. We were not the master race with superior weapons and inevitable victory. We were simply young men with obsolete tactics, facing an enemy with superior resources and the intelligence to employ them effectively. The transformation Hartmann described, from confidence in German superiority to recognition of American material and tactical advantage, repeated itself across the German military in the war's final year. The experience of the 88mm crews facing M36s represented a microcosm of this larger transformation. A weapon that had terrorized Allied forces for years was systematically neutralized by opponents who studied German tactics, identified vulnerabilities, and developed specific countermeasures backed by overwhelming industrial capacity. The legacy extends beyond the specific weapons involved. The fundamental lesson that mobility and industrial capacity can overcome technical sophistication influenced military thinking throughout the Cold War and into the modern era. Soviet doctrine emphasizing mass production of adequate systems over limited production of perfect systems traced directly to lessons learned studying the German experience. American doctrine maintaining technological edge while ensuring quantitative sufficiency reflected similar lessons from the opposite perspective. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.